Undoubtedly, the greatest influence on me and my work are the people I've interacted with and the stories they've generously shared with me. It started with the staff, management, and patients at an inpatient psychiatric unit I worked at almost 15 years ago. I watched my coworkers, all of whom were far more experienced than me, work under immense limitations and poor pay. There was one woman in particular, a social worker who was charged with helping patients with aftercare plans, who would do her very best to give every patient a fighting chance to have a safe place to sleep at night. It was a complicated endeavor in a failing system, few housing options, and limited time. I admired her tenacity and empathy so much. I spent hours and hours with patients, talking with them about their lives, frustration at not being able to complete tasks that seemed so simple to others, annoyance at the side effects of the medications they were on to manage their disease, uncertainty about where they would get food or wash their clothes when they left the hospital, concern nobody in their lives would notice if they disappeared. It was truly heartbreaking. Bearing witness to their emotionally raw stories taught me so much about human nature, what it must feel like to have nobody or nothing to consistently rely on, and to be constantly treated as a taker and not a giver in society, as one patient told me. Social determinants, like poverty, are at the very core of our work. They impact the patients, families, and staff in community behavioral health. How can we expect our workforce to bring their A game if they themselves are being underpaid and struggle to make ends meet, be present for their families and friends, and lead healthy, balanced lives? How can our patients be focused on their health when they don't have a way to get to their clinic visits or the pharmacy? Over the years, as I've advanced at the National Council, I've tried my very best to be a listener and advocate for the patients and staff at our member organizations. I've done hundreds of site visits, projects, coaching calls, conversations in the hallways at NatCon, read evaluations, and monitored our social media to create a composite of the experiences of those we represent. And I'll continue to do that moving forward so I can share the diversity of experiences in our field.
Ain't it better to hear, to listen more attentively? Ain't it better to know the heartaches flow relentlessly? Ain't it best to relate, to walk with them along the road, around the curve? Let's feel their pain, so we'll know the ones we serve. Through their eyes we'll see, through their eyes we'll see. Let us start with empathy. Through their eyes we'll see.
Don't it inspire to see all the grace around when you feel tired from running the daily race around? We're only human, we hurt just like they hurt, just like we're all the same. We feel to heal them.
Through their eyes we'll see. It's the stories that feed us. Through their eyes we'll see. So compassion can lead us.
That's diversity. Through their eyes we'll see. When we know the cost of poverty.
Through their eyes
When we're a listener and an advocate, and we recognize the diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and challenges, then we can begin to make a real, lasting difference in the lives of our patients, peers, and providers.
Their eyes will see. Through their eyes will see.
My brother's name is Raphael Sweeney. He is a kind, sweet, generous man. He'll give you the last $5 in his pocket if you need it. Or if he's walking by someone on the street, he'll stop and say hello and see if there's anything he can do to help. He struggled with bipolar disorder most of his adult life. 2 years ago, he became 100% blind, a direct result of his mental illness. So now he has a new disability to learn to live with. Most stories you hear about, access revolves around people not being able to get into the system, having to wait a month to see a psychiatrist after a suicide attempt, or finding crisis or detox services. That is not this story. Last year, my brother was in an institution for 320 days. In the past 3 years, 713. Going back to 2012, he's been in the hospital more than 1,022 days. It might be easy to say that my brother is a very sick man, and he is. But he has had times in his life when he was doing well. He was working part-time, living by himself. He had a dog named Charlie. But when he started to struggle, the system didn't know how to catch him. And either the people interacting with him didn't care or weren't empowered enough to act. A person on his care team recently said to me that Rafe's case is the most complex that he's ever seen. The system has spent tens of millions of dollars on my brother's care. And the best thing I can say about how he's doing today is that he's not dead and he's not in jail. But it didn't have to be this way. I speak on behalf of my family because it's never been just about Rafe. His illness has had a huge impact on all of us. Our story is not one of access, but one of an extremely sick and fragile person constantly falling through the cracks. A person with multiple chronic conditions and a system that has been incapable of the flexibility, creativity, and accountability necessary to help him find and live the life he wants to live. I've spent my entire career working in this industry. I have been honored to work with so many of the people in this room, many of whom have bent over backwards to help me. There's a tremendous amount of passion and energy and enthusiasm in our workforce, but there are also so many barriers. Our system is so fragmented. There's no one in charge. There's no one to hold accountable. I know we can do better. Those of us here in this room, we must fix it. We can't wait for someone else to show up with a magic wand. We have to identify what's broken and create new solutions so the next family has a chance to live out the rewarding and meaningful life we each deserve. Thank you.
This ain't coming from no hero, just a person in the fight, just another one who sees the forest for the trees and knows that we can set it right. Come on. us out, everybody. There. When the last man's lost through the system's cracks, when the policy is aligned with the facts, when they realize how many missing paths, then it shall be. But when the last person suffers the indignity of shame, that we look for the treatment instead of the blame. When access is open, we can proudly proclaim, oh, it shall be we. Come on! Oh, it shall be we. It shall be we. Who'll spark this change? Oh, it shall. Our healthcare decides to put people first, but we hope to recover and never fear the worst. We're sick or embraced instead of being cursed, and it shall be we. It shall be we. It shall be we. Nobody got this but you and me. It shall be we. Come on. And when money talks, but science wins out, and the ones who know are the ones with clout. When the system is best, you can have no doubt. It shall be we. It shall be we. It shall be we. Ain't nobody got theirs but us. It shall be we. Yeah, it shall be we. Come on. It shall. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Linda Rosenberg.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. Did you have a good evening? Yes. Did you go out partying? So did my husband and my son. I, of course, went to bed and had a Cobb salad. But Wednesday night, tomorrow night, I'm going to party. I just wanted, you know, I was backstage listening to Mohini and to Kara. You know, Mohini is a vice president with the National Council, started with us as an intern 12 years ago. Kara worked for us and with us for a number of years till she went out on her own. We recently had 2 vice presidents become CEOs of big other organizations. And I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of the National Council staff. They really are amazing. You know, when I get a chance, you know, to interact with staff at every level, I often think, you know, I wish I were their mom or their grandmom. They are just so special. And I think that their love of you is palpable. And they will take that away from this conference. They care about you. As you heard, they care so much about the people you serve and so admire what you do. And you're going to have a treat this morning. A very special woman I just got to spend some time with backstage. And she is committed to making sure that we can solve some of our biggest problems. How we can make sure that suffering doesn't become generational, generation after generation. Becky Margiotta is a West Point graduate. She was commander of 2 U.S. Army Special Operation companies, and she tells us that we can't think small. She co-founded the Billions Institute, an organization committed in the next 50 years to unleashing billions of people to spread solutions to the world's biggest problems. Prior to the Billions Institute, Becky created the 100,000 Homes campaign that housed 105,000 long-term vulnerable homeless people in 4 years. Amazing. What she learned is that the halfway things we do now, the way we manage now, actually costs more than solving the problems. And I think you all live that every day. They are just Band-Aid solutions. She has a bias toward action, so we feel like she is a comrade with us. And she and her institute really enable change agents to tackle the largest and seemingly intractable problems that we face and really make meaningful change. Please join me in warmly welcoming Becky.
Good morning, y'all. Morning. Thank you, Linda, and everyone at the National Council for Behavioral Health. It's a real honor for me to be here today, and it's good for me to be back home, too, where people talk normal. I spent a good chunk of my childhood 30 miles south of here in a small town called Franklin, Tennessee. Right? Thank you. Yeah, right. Franklin! And this was back in the days, I'm dating myself, where parents said, you know, just be home before dark. And the only mischief we'd get in was sneaking into the neighbor's pool when they weren't home. I did that a few times. And I'm the oldest of 7 kids. And even back in those days, and maybe the oldest of you, if you're the oldest sibling, you can relate to this, I felt a sense of responsibility for my siblings. Gosh, man, I told Linda, I was like, I cry all the time in keynotes. So, but I wasn't expecting it this early. So y'all are in the mental health profession, you know I'm good. Crying is good, right? So I felt very responsible for my siblings. And so fast forward to the year 2007, and I can tell you exactly where I was on the street in Tribeca, New York City, when my mom called me to say that one of my sisters was in the hospital because she was suicidal. And her attempts at self-medicating with alcohol were leading her to think that drinking a whole bottle of bleach would take her out of her agony, and thank goodness she admitted herself. I think 3 times she was actually hospitalized for suicidality, suffering from mental health and self-medicating, and that was more than 10 years ago, and these stories don't always turn out well, but I'm happy to say that my sister's doing well, and for all I know, that one of you in this room treated her, and thank you. So it's a large family, so about a year ago, I got a phone call from another one of my sisters saying, hey, I think one of our brothers is doing drugs. And I was like, nah, come on. I mean, he's weird, but he's not, you know, doing drugs, right? And it took us 6 months as a family to piece together what was going on. It wasn't obvious to us what was happening, but it turns out he was injecting himself with 5 milligrams of fentanyl every day just to get through work. Yeah, I hear that. He told me apparently that's a lot. He'd even go on his lunch break to be able to make it through the rest of his day through work. And I know in a lot of these situations, these too end in tragedy, but thankfully, my family has been lucky so far. My brother, I just visited him a couple weeks ago, and he just made his 1 year of sobriety. And yeah. That's right. And he's better than I've ever seen him. And for all I know, some of the people in this room treated him as well. And my whole family is just incredibly grateful. And I want to thank you doesn't feel sufficient. I think on behalf of all of the families who have family members who will be at graduations and weddings and birthdays and anniversaries that they wouldn't have been at. We're all grateful for you. And your work saves lives, your work transforms lives, and I know that while I'm talking to you this morning for 45 minutes, if the timing's right, I know that from the statistics, more people will die of an opioid overdose just while we're in this room this morning, right? So here's my assessment, and I look at lots of sectors and leadership and things like that. My assessment for you is that you don't have the luxury of incremental change. So over the past couple years, I've trained more than 600 leaders working on large-scale change, on how to design and implement large-scale change. These people who come through my Skid Row school, they're working on human trafficking, healthcare, human services, homelessness, climate change, education, racial justice, social justice, peace, all sorts of things, you name it, anti-gun violence. For them, their world is on fire. I think for all of us, right, we don't have the luxury for incremental change. So have you all heard about transactional versus transformational leadership? It's a thing, right? Transactional leadership is more, I'll give you this if you do that, or here's a carrot, no, here's a stick, kind of Pavlovian. And I think transactional leadership is perfectly fine if what you want is incremental change. But what I want to put on the table this morning is transformational leadership. And what I mean by transformational leadership is leadership that's worthy of being followed. Leadership worthy of being followed. And leadership that creates of their followers, leaders, right? So your ability to turn the people who are following you into leaders. So I want to share a couple thoughts on this, and I'm going to be honest, this has not made it through peer review research. I'm just kind of making it up. I'm my own guinea pig here, Jeannie asked me to share with you 10 things, and what I did was I reflected on the leaders who've been leaders worth following for me, and the leaders who've helped turn me into a leader, and I want to share some of their stories and drop some of those points out. I know 10 is a lot, and so my guess is, my hope is for everybody in this room, at least one gets you, that it's like a zinger, and you'll be like, ooh, that's me, and you'll jot a note down. And I think that some are going to be for other people, right? So you're going to be like, Larry needs to hear number 3, And so, we'll be talking to you, Larry, this morning. And some aren't going to resonate, and that's cool with me, but if you could just bear with me, I'll try to get through these 10. So let's do this. Y'all ready? All right, story time. So my first one is leaders are absolutely unwilling to micromanage. Now, this one is a hard one for the control freaks in the room. And it's okay, you're not alone. I'm a recovering control freak too. Can I see by show of hands, are there any other recovering control freaks? Okay, you're not alone. All right. Can I see by show of hands? Are there any other just actual, I'm just writing this thing down, still control freaks? I'm not even in recovery? Okay. All right, so this one's for you. All right, so listen, we've got to cut it out, all right? It's demoralizing and it undermines people. And here's what I see with people is they're longing for opportunities to make mistakes and try things and fail and learn and grow. And it's only through those mistakes that we learn. I learned this lesson back in 1993 when I was a first lieutenant in the Army stationed in Hawaii. My job was to work in the Systems Control Center of the communications network for the entire 25th Infantry Division. And I was all of 24 years old and the junior person on staff working in the Systems Control. So guess what it meant being the junior person on staff? Can anybody guess? Did anyone say night shift? Night shift, all right? So we tracked the whole network, and we used green and red magnets. Green meant the link was good, red meant the link was bad, and we managed about 20 links or so, and my job was to keep the links green, right? You with me? And during peacetime, every few weeks, we'd do this thing called going to the field, and we'd practice what we do in case we were in a war, and we'd simulate things as realistically as possible. It just kind of seemed, everyone took this very seriously, right? There's a little bit of a mystery to me, but it was very serious when we went to the field. So one night around 2 a.m., we received our first notice that a major link had gone from green to red. This happens, right? And my stomach sank a little bit because this is, Houston, we have a problem. then another one, then another one, then another one, and the whole network went red. The entire network went red. And I was trying to think that, I know there's a civilian-military divide, and I was trying to think about how y'all could relate to things just going red and red and red right before your eyes as civilians. And then it occurred to me that the Democrats in the room know exactly the despair of which I speak. All right. So I wasn't sure how that one was going to go, but all right. This is going to be fun. All right, so back on that night, we did everything we could to fix things, right? We were like trying to do it, and at some point we realized, you know what, we've got to wake the colonel up. We've got to wake her up. Because at 6 a.m. there was a briefing with the general, and she was going to be held to account for the whole division can't talk, right? And nobody wants to wake up the boss at 3 a.m., but this was bad. This was really bad. So around 3:15, we're briefing Colonel Jan Hicks, and standing somewhat defeated in front of this all-red dry erase board. And she very seriously took it all in as we weighed our options and nodded and seemed to be like she really cared. And I was not expecting what happened next. I swear to you, this is exactly what happened. This woman poked me in the chest 4 times. She was like, "Unfuck this, Lieutenant." And like, and then she walked out of the door and went back to bed. Now, before you judge her, control freaks, let me tell you, this woman went on to be a 2-star general, and she was beloved by me and everyone who ever had the opportunity to serve with her. And I know she cared, right? I absolutely know she cared. It was her butt on the line, not mine, right? This wasn't a thing where she needed her beauty rest and couldn't be bothered. And I know if she wanted to, she was completely competent enough to be like, "Step aside, Lieutenant, I'll take this from here." And she could have gotten the network back up to green, absolutely. And I've thought about it for years, and here's what I think. I think Colonel, now Major General Jan Hicks, she took it as a sacred responsibility to give young leaders the room to grow and try and fail and learn from their mistakes. She knew one way or another we'd get the network back up to green, and she knew if we didn't, she could cover for us with the general and buy us time to do it. And she was willing to risk her own reputation to give us the opportunity to fail. And I thought about this for decades. That really was one of my formative leadership development experiences. And I happened to be passing through Augusta, Georgia, where she had retired 25 years after this event happened. And I had the great delight of taking one of my first mentors out to lunch. And sitting across the lunch table, I recounted this same story to her, because I really wanted to know her perspective of what had happened. So I'm telling her the story, and she barely remembered it. She didn't. She's howling with laughter like I'm telling her about some MASH episode, you know? And you know, now this is what I think. Maybe she really just did want her beauty sleep, right? And sometimes that's how things go. It was nothing to her, but it was everything to me, right? So my guess is for a lot of us in this room, myself included, this goes against all of our training, all of our pedagogy. We like having the right answer. We like being needed, right? But leaders who bring out their best in their people cultivate the discipline to intentionally step back and say, what do you think we should do? You know? That's a pickle, right? And the next generation is raring to go, right? Look at the students in Parkland. Look at the climate change student marches. They're ready to go, right? It's in all of our interests to take them under our wings. Yes, take them under our wings, but then give them room to fly. Push them out of the nest. So I think the world could use a whole lot more leaders like General Jan Hicks, and leaders absolutely refuse to micromanage. Number 1. Moving on. All right, number 2. Leaders challenge people to question their assumptions. They push us to think about things they weren't thinking about, and they challenge us to challenge the status quo. Fast forward to 1997, the Army had just opened up some of its units to Special Operations Commands to women, and I was lucky enough to be the first woman ever to command in Bravo Company 112 Signal Battalion Special Operations Airborne. That's right. This unit deployed all over the world providing communications support to Green Berets, Rangers, Navy SEALs, you name it. We provided their phones and their communications. And I was 27 years old and I had 100 soldiers who reported to me. First woman in this thing, just opened up to women. So guess what I needed to do? Did someone say I needed to prove that I was a badass? So the first week in the job, when my non-commissioned officers came up to me and said, "Ma'am, Specialist Johnson showed up at formation this morning drunk again," you know? I knew exactly what we needed to do. We needed to discharge this dude out of the Army, right? That was unacceptable behavior, and this commander was not gonna tolerate it. So I had the lawyer draw up the paperwork, but it still required the colonel's signature to sign off, and then Specialist Johnson was gonna be gone, right? So I go into Colonel Howie Cohen, it's like, knock, 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 come on in. And I was so confident, like, yeah, this is the right thing to do, right? So I showed Colonel Cohen the paperwork, and he just kind of thumbed through it, and he said, he leaned back at his desk, and he kind of went like this, and he goes, "So Specialist Johnson's showing up to drunken formation, huh? What's going on in his life that he's drinking?" And I was like, standing at attention, I was like, "I don't know, sir." Hadn't thought to ask. He's like, "He's already been to drug and alcohol treatment?" And I'm like, "Yeah, 3 times. Loser." You know, I was like, it's him, you know? And then Colonel Cohen, he goes, "I tell you what, I'll sign that paperwork, but first I want you to find out something for me." And I was like, "Yes, sir, what do you need me to find out?" And he goes, "Here's what I want to know. I want to know what's wrong with that drug and alcohol treatment program that it didn't fix my soldier." I was like, "Oh, right? What?" But you know what? He had a point. I actually went to the drug and alcohol treatment center. I was like, "Hey, why didn't you fix my soldier?" But here's the thing, right? If he was in good faith doing the treatment, maybe it wasn't an effective treatment modality. I don't know. This is your world, right? I don't know. But here's the real question is, why did I have a greater loyalty to being tough and perceived as tough than I did to my own subordinates' well-being, right? And that's what Colonel Cohen challenged me to do. So we eventually did discharge Specialist Johnson from the military, but I think we did it in a much more compassionate and humane way. And what a gift Colonel Cohen gave that cocky 27-year-old captain, the gift of challenging me and to question my assumptions and to challenge the status quo. Total gift. All right, keep doing that one. Okay, this one's gonna be a surprise. Okay, 3, leaders clean toilets. I know what you're thinking. People are like, "Woo!" I know what you're thinking. You're like, "This one's for Larry." If there's a Larry in the room, I'm really sorry. All right, let me tell you one more Army story, and then I'm gonna move on to social work type of stories. So midway through command of Bravo Company, we got a new first sergeant. And for those of you who don't know about the military, I was a captain, and technically I was in charge, but the non-commissioned officers actually run the show, right? They're actually really in charge. So first sergeants, Master Chief Petty officers like Jeannie Campbell, they're in charge. They really, really, really run the show. So the first day of my new first sergeant's job, you bet we wanted to know, like, who was this guy gonna be about? Even me too, even though I was his boss in like really big air quotes, right? Oh, so my first sergeant is Mark Clifton, and it's this dude. Can y'all see the picture? The dude, the guy with the drill sergeant hat, straight out of Central Casting. The poster child for integrity in the military. Who would you follow, him or me? I'm following him, right? This guy could have done anything he wanted to on his first day of job, and we would have followed him anywhere, myself included. Our company headquarters had 3 offices. It was pretty small. It had my office, Mark's office, a little admin office, and then there was a small single-stall bathroom. I thought it was clean. I thought it was okay. I thought it was acceptable. I'd seen cleaner. I thought it was okay, right? So imagine this dude with big yellow rubber gloves all the way up to his elbows and some bleach and some green scratchy things, spent his entire first day in the bathroom scrubbing every inch of it. And a couple times the first day, I'd go to my office and I'd be like, yep, he's still cleaning the bathroom. Okay, all right, right? And all the soldiers who had business to do with the new first sergeant, because you want to find out what he's about, literally came and stood in parade rest right outside the bathroom, and he just talked to them, keep cleaning the bathroom, and they'd be like, "First sergeant, I'd like to know if I can have permission to blah, blah, blah," and be like, "Yeah, sure, that's cool, you can do that." 5 o'clock rolls around, dude snaps off his gloves with this satisfaction that I can't quite understand to this day, and we walked out to evening formation. He stood in front of the company for the first time, and he said, "I'm First Sergeant Clifton. I'm glad to be here. I look forward to working with each of you. Bathroom's clean. Let's keep it that way." Hua, which in case you didn't know, hua means everything but no, right? So that's like that. I never asked Mark why he did that, but I think what he was doing was letting everybody know that he wasn't above cleaning the bathrooms. I don't think he was a germaphobe, maybe. I didn't see any other evidence of that, right? He would even clean toilets. And here's the, leaders don't walk by the trash. You pick it up, right? Leaders aren't above doing dirty work. In fact, when dirty work is being done, I think it's important for leaders to be there doing right there too. So when's the last time you got out of your office and got your hands dirty? When's the last time you popped in on the night shift, see how things were going, pointed at somebody to unfuck something? It's in doing these things that you demonstrate your worthiness of being followed. And your people will notice without you ever even saying a word, and it will shape the way that they show up as leaders too. And Mark did that for me. So leaders clean toilets. Larry. All right. 4. Leaders build consensus towards bold, quantifiable, time-bound aims. In 2004, Don Berwick launched a campaign to prevent 100,000 unnecessary deaths in hospitals in a time when hospitals were in the top 5 leading causes of death in the United States, right up there with car accidents, all these things. You go to the hospital for one thing and you die for something else, right? It's a thing, and it's something to be very alarmed. And here's what Don said when he launched this. And I usually cry when I read this, but we'll see if I can get through it. This is what he said. He stood up in front of a room like this at the Institute for Healthcare Improvements conference, and he said, "Here's what I think we should do. I think we should save 100,000 lives, and I think we should do it by June 14th, 2006, 18 months from today. Some is not a number, soon is not a time. Here's the number, 100,000. Here's the time, June 14th, 2006, 9 a.m. And when we do, we will celebrate, starting with pizza and ending with champagne. We will celebrate ourselves because their names could never be known. Our contribution will be what did not happen to them. And though they are unknown, we will know that mothers and fathers are at graduations and weddings they would have missed, and that grandchildren will know grandparents they might not have never known, and holidays will be taken, and work completed, and books read, and symphonies heard, and gardens tended that without our work would have only been a bed of weeds." That is a beautiful way to launch a campaign. And what he instigated is incredibly rare in the nonprofit sector, all too rare. It's like a unicorn, is a how much by when. Some is not a number, soon is not a time. I was living in New York City working on street homelessness when I heard about this 100,000 Lives campaign. And maybe we had helped maybe a couple hundred people move into housing at that point. And when I heard about it, I was so inspired. I said to my boss, I was like, "We should do that, but we should house 100,000 people." And sure enough, within a year, we had launched the 100,000 Homes campaign to help 100,000 people get long-term homeless, get off the streets and straight into housing using a housing first model, right? And that's a testament to my boss, too, who was like, "Sure, why don't you do that? Let's do that. I'll raise the money, you do the work." All right, so, and 4 years later, 105,000 people in 186 cities were in housing, right? Now, and it wasn't just me. So this public health veterinarian, did y'all even know that was a thing, that you could be a public health veterinarian? Like shelter cats. So this woman, veterinarian Kate Hurley, read about the 100,000 Lives campaign in Dan Heath's book, Switch, and she said, "I think I'm going to save 1 million cats from unnecessary euthanization by last summer," and she did. She saved 1 million cats from unnecessary, who becomes a vet to put cats to sleep, right? And listen to this, my family adopted one of those cats, right? And so now they're everywhere, right? So some is not a number, soon is not a time, and what will be your version of that, regardless of how grandiose? I think that's a really big thing we can do as leaders. The next thing that leaders do is commit. And why commit? I learned this from my mentor, Katie Hendricks. She means gathering your energy and moving forward in a direction. So it's two things, gathering energy and moving forward. And it's not one of those like, I'll do it if you do it kind of things. It's like, this is between me and the universe, me and my higher power, whatever that is. It's a sacred thing to commit and be all in. Commitment is what brings some is not a number, soon is not a time to life. It's what turns the lights on and communicates that you mean business. I'll tell you that every ounce of my being was committed to get 100,000 people off the streets and into housing. So much so that when the 10,000th person moved in, I went and got this tattoo, which you should be able to see. Can you see the tattoo? Can you see that the comma's in the wrong place? So I had this joke, right, where I'd be like, and if we don't house 100,000 people, I'll just have this permanent testament to failure, you know? And, but here, I'll show you. The 100,000 person did move in, and then I went and I got the last zero. It was very satisfying, right? Can you see it? All right. So now I don't have a stupid tattoo for the rest of my life. But here's the thing, is when you commit, it's contagious, right? It sends a signal to people who might follow that this is real, this is a thing. You're actually creating reality. You're creating something that doesn't exist when you commit. It's a very powerful thing. And people can smell ambivalence a mile away, right? Nobody wants to follow somebody who's in it half-ass, right? I want to tell you the motto of my CrossFit gym. Anybody have CrossFit people here? Right? Woo! Don't half-ass anything. Whatever you do, always use your full ass. Maybe that should have been one of the 10. I think that's another way of saying that. I'm not saying you need to get a tattoo. I'm just saying if you really care, why wouldn't you? Here's what I'll say. May I just suggest in your one and precious life, do things that are tattoo worthy, right? And leaders commit and get tattoos. Okay, so, number 6. Leaders can hear the word no. So you're control freaks, you're like, no, we can't. So once you've committed to a bold, time-bound goal, and you're committed and you're all in, whether it's something internal to your organization or something outside there in the bigger world, the reality is immediately going to sink in that whatever it is, if it's something worth doing, you cannot do it alone. And here's the bad news. Just because you're committed doesn't mean anybody else is, right? And that's a mistake that leaders make, is imposing their will on others. And this is a mistake that I did in the early days of the 100,000 Homes campaign. So I would roll up on a city and talk to the social workers and whoever was providing services to people who are on the streets in that community and say, hey, we're doing this thing, and we're trying to house people directly off the streets. It was in the Housing First model. And what do you think, guys? Let's like all work together. We can do this thing, right? And there's every single time there was people like, you know, and they weren't buying it. They didn't believe that people could be okay in housing if they weren't ready for it, whatever it was, right? And sometimes people would warm up eventually, but there was always a tomato thrower in the room, right? And sometimes, despite my best efforts, whole communities would decide, yeah, this isn't our thing. This isn't for us. And each time I took it personally, right? It's like I would like shake the dust off my sandals at the airport and be like, we're too good for you anyways, you know? I've been kicked out of better cities. Suck it, Seattle. Not that I was bitter, Seattle. We can talk later. I just felt it personally. I felt rejected, right? And if I'm honest, on my worst days, what I was doing was imposing versus inviting. And leadership is never about manipulation. It's about finding your people and inviting them into something bigger than both of you. And it's about being willing to let go also of the folks who aren't with you. That's okay. So thank goodness, eventually we made enough money that we could hire someone else to go do these visits in the communities to have a national field organizer. And we found this tireless, amazing human being named Linda Kaufman. She turned 60 years old the year she started working with us. And in her wisdom, she had a much better attitude towards rejection than I did. What she said, she said, just because you say no doesn't mean we're not going to do it. It just means we're not going to do it with you. That stuck with me. And if you can't hear a no, we risk becoming oppressive. And here's what I think there's plenty of oppression in the world, and as leaders, we don't need to be adding to it, right? So trust me, you only want people who want to be there. So I think we really need to be willing to listen and respect a no, wherever we may hear that. Seattle. Okay. There's a corollary to this, which is that leaders can also say the word no, right? So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Becky, technically, if you're right that leaders say the word no, wouldn't 2-year-olds be running the world? And as a parent of 2 young children, here's what I say to you. Who says they aren't? Right? So with our son, Huck, it took him a long time to say his first word. We were actually getting kind of concerned about it. And my wife and I were debating, is he going to say mama, which is what she goes by, or boo, which is what I go by? No. His first word was no. His very first spoken word was no. And we were kind of excited, but we were like, he said no. And then fast forward a few months ago, he wanted to make sure his little sister didn't find her birthday presents that we had kind of hidden in the laundry room. So he went and he scribbled onto his desk and he scribbled something down. And he came back with this piece of paper that you can see here. And it was his this is his first written word. And my first thought was like, who the heck taught our kid how to write? Like, I didn't know he knew how to do this. And then my second thought was, well done, my son. This will serve you well. I suspect when you were toddlers, you all had access to your no too. But for some of us in the room, somewhere along the way, we lost our no. And I want to encourage you to get it back today. Like, find something to say no to. A lot of people are attracted to the healing professions and human services, myself included, that we come by it honestly, right? I've been humbled and moved and deeply touched by the number of leaders I meet whose motivation for doing the work is the trauma they've experienced in their own lives. And I think that this generates an extraordinary power of empathy and deep reserves of resolve, and it can make it a lot harder to say no because you know the sufferings that's on the other end of that no, right? You feel their pain too. And we need you in this for the long term. I'm going to share with you how I first learned to say no. I was in a workshop. I was 43 years old. I had just completed one of those workshops in California with one of my mentors, Katie Hendricks, and we did an experiential exercise to listen to in our bodies where we feel a yes or a no to things. So I was like really excited to have discovered my no, and I was like really pumped up, but like California style. You want to see what that looks like? Okay, I was like pumped up California style. So the next morning, it was like 180 out from the military, right? I had a call with my teammates the next morning from the 100,000 Homes campaign, and someone on his team was like, hey, Becky, they want you to do a keynote in Tulsa. And I was like, oh, my body was like, no. Listen, Tulsa's cool. I've been there a lot of times. Really cool. It wasn't about that. It's just I had been traveling a lot, and I just didn't. My body said no. But here I am. I'm thinking like, but it's my job. I'm the director. This is what I should do. They're going to think I'm lazy. They're going to think I'm not in it. Blah, 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 blah. No, right? My body, now I'm like, my body won't shut up, right? So here's what I managed to eke out on the phone call. I was like, hey, y'all, I was just, at this workshop learning about my no, and I just like listening to my body, and I don't really want to go to Tulsa. And then there was this like long pause, and I'm imagining they're judging me and like, oh my God, this is over, And then I heard my colleague Linda, she says, I'll go to Tulsa. I'd love to give that keynote. And I was like, thank you. So every time you say yes to something you don't really want to do, every time you agree to sacrifice something and take away time from your family or your loved ones or your cat, whatever, every time you take one for the team, I'm not saying it's fundamentally bad to take for the team. We should all do that, right? My team used to like to say, like, we would bleed for each other, and I was like, whoa, that's a lot, right? But if if you have a pattern of doing that, of feeling like you have no choice to do that, it's a recipe for resentment and burnout. And when people are burnt out, that's just going to tell you, like, the revolution's not happening here, right? If you can't say no, how can anybody trust that you really mean it when you say yes? And how can anybody trust you if you're not being honest with yourself? So no isn't just useful for self-care, which I really want to encourage all you to do. It's also useful for other things like racism, sexism, oppression. No is really an important thing to have in your repertoire as a leader. All right. How are we doing here? We're on number 8. All right. So, leaders liberate their people to do their best work and be their best selves. This is the work, and I think this is really huge, and this is where you turn followers into leaders themselves. So long before there was a 100,000 Homes campaign, I was slogging away as the director of innovations for this MacArthur Genius Award winner, Roseanne Haggerty. She hired me to reduce street homelessness in Times Square by 2/3 in 3 years. We needed 1 more year, but we got it down by 87% in 4 years. And after that, she took me out for coffee, which you got to watch out when your boss does that. And she was like, hey, Becky, you're pretty good at startups. Why don't you just run all my new things? And like you can be my director of innovations or something like that. And I was really excited to do that, actually. It was exhilarating working for her, truly. And I just want to say, trust me, this woman had no shortage of good ideas. So I'm talking years of waking up at a reasonable human hour to discover that I had emails from her from 2 a.m. with ideas. Any of y'all send emails to your folks at 2 a.m.? Some people just don't need as much sleep, right? All right, I'm not one of them, right? Like, this doesn't just happen, okay? So, I'm serious. I'm really serious about that. All right? So this can get to be where, and all I knew how to do at that point, I hadn't discovered my no yet, I hadn't recovered it, was to be like, that's a great idea, we'll do it today, right? Like I was just this eager beaver. And I was getting kind of burnt out yet, right? And I started to contemplate quitting my job. We grew it to where I had 13 direct reports. That's just too many. You should never have a team bigger than 2 pizzas can feed, right? And I would be muttering on the subway. Like, I hesitate to say this in this crowd, to share my inner monologue, but I'd be like, and she's gonna say this, and then I'm gonna say that, and then she's gonna say this, and then I'm gonna be like, I quit. And then I'm like by myself, and I was having this conversation all throughout New York City, right? So one day Roseanne emails me, and she says, let's talk about how things are going. Like, I'm gonna be in Soho this afternoon. Where are you gonna be? Like, let's meet for coffee. Because we were always just moving all over the city. We were barely ever in our offices. So going into that meeting, I was absolutely certain one of 2 things was going to happen. She was going to fire me or I was going to quit, right? So on my BlackBerry, remember those? I was like, I'll be there, right? I was like ready to quit, So thankfully, Roseanne offered to go first. And this is how she started. She was like, Becky, you're one of the best leaders I've ever met. I was like, go on. And then she goes, but you're not a very good manager. And I was like, yeah, I know. And then she said this, and I want you to remember this too. She said, what can we do to free you up so you can really lead? And if you could lead something, what would you want to lead? And I'll spare you the details of how we reorganized the entire company. But suffice it to say, she didn't fire me, and I didn't quit. But for sure, her question changed the course of my life. And I think there's lots of people who are in housing today because of that move from her as a leader. I share this with you because I think it's the #1 key to unleashing your people to do big things, is noticing where they come to life and saying, let's do more of that. I don't think there's any need at all in any organizational or relationship setting for blame or criticism. I think it's toxic. It's not just me, it's on the cover of Harvard Business Review this morning. I saw this on the airport, right? Just free people up to do what they love, right? So I think that's one of the most important sacred tasks we have as leaders. Number 9, leaders appreciate. Talk about no blame and no criticism, appreciating. What we appreciate appreciates. It grows in value. What we notice and give loving attention to grows, right? Authentic appreciation is rocket fuel for any kind of change you want to make happen and any kind of large-scale change or even organizational change. And by appreciation, this is what I say, does not mean ending your emails with thanks, exclamation point. Doesn't count, doesn't count. So let's tell you something, just a quick story. I had the best kindergarten teacher in the world, and I remember once I got done my work early, and I went up to her and I was like, Mrs. Moncher, I'm done my work, what should I do, right? And she was like, oh, you could just give me a hug. And I was like, I'll do that. And like, it was just this warm, teddy bear-y kind of kindergarten teacher, you know the type. And I felt so loved by her, and she was always my favorite teacher. Like, no one else could live up to Mrs. Moncher. And I wasn't the only one. When I was in my 30s, I was living in New York City and enjoying brunch, as we do in the city, with a friend who had gone to the Air Force Academy. And he asked, we're just making conversation, getting to know each other, and we just met. And he says, where'd you grow up? And I said, well, mostly in Franklin, Tennessee, but I also spent a lot of time in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's like, oh, I'm from Scottsdale. Where'd you go to school? And I was like, this little small Catholic school called St. Teresa's. And his eyes got this big, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we both immediately started getting tears streaming down our faces. And we both at the same time, we were like, Mrs. Muncher? And there we are at brunch in Union Square, just weeping away. And that was the kind of teacher that she was. And for many years, I would Google Mrs. Moncher just to find her so I could say thank you to her. And I could never find Mrs. Moncher until one day, about 2 years ago, I Googled her, and I did find her, but it was her obituary. And I was crushed, mostly because I had never had the chance to appreciate her. Feeling a wave of emotion again. Because I know where this is going. Let me just feel this for a second. Remember I told you I used to live 30 miles from here? My best friend's name was Debbie Damon. We played soccer nonstop. We wouldn't even come inside. We would drink out of a hose, so we didn't have to come inside. And her dad was our soccer coach, and her mom welcomed me into her home as if I was one of their own. And Mr. and Mrs. Damon are here with us today. I'm so excited they're here in the audience. So if you will indulge me for a minute, I want to do over on Mrs. Moncher, but don't die. Don't die. Mrs. Damon, you defy the odds with your hand-me-down liver. Mrs. Damon was the first liver transplant from Vanderbilt University in 1991, right? You're a living miracle, and my guess it's because of your deep love of your husband and your children, and now your 8 grandchildren, and maybe counting. And your students, too, all those years that you're a high school teacher. You bring a joie de vivre and a love of life and kindness into every single interaction I've ever had with you. Inspired by you now for decades, I've indicated on my driver's license that I'm willing to be an organ donor. Just hope that doesn't happen soon. And I feel so grateful for the way you've welcomed me into your home and into your family, and how you still go out of your way to do that 35 years later. Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Damon, Dr. Damon, he is a professor at Vanderbilt University. I didn't call him Dr. Damon, no, he's just Mr. Damon to us. I played soccer all the way through college, and you were my coach, I think, starting when I was 10, and you're the best coach I ever had. Appreciation was really a big deal. You believed in me. Yeah, thank you. You believed in me well in advance of me believing in myself. You taught me to be a team player, and you taught me to be a good sport. You made fun of me relentlessly. And it was exactly what my awkward teenage self needed to not take myself so seriously, and apparently it still comes in handy today. They offered to pick me up at the airport, and I was like, only if it's not an imposition. And he said, oh, it is an imposition, but Julie insisted. You're one of the most kind and loving people that I've ever known, and I feel so grateful to have had you in my life. And you've helped shape me into the person that I've become. So thank you both. So I just wanted to demonstrate live what appreciation looks like. It's not a thanks exclamation point. It's noticing and really saying to somebody what it is that really touches you before they die. Don't die. Nobody die. So here's what I want to ask you to do. Everyone in this audience, right now, think of somebody, whether it was a coach, whether it was a fifth grade soccer coach, your colleague, a teacher, someone who inspired you, a mentor who has challenged you, and commit to appreciating that person before the sun goes down today. Text, phone, email, hunt them down, do whatever it takes, but appreciate them sincerely for how they've helped shape you into the person you are today, and keep paying that forward. All right. All right, number 10, leaders can count to 10. Just wanted to acknowledge you all as leaders that I did have 10, but I didn't like the 10th one, so I deleted it on the airplane yesterday. I just wanted to honor your counting abilities. It's not you, it's me. All right, sorry, Jeannie. Jeannie asked me to do 10. All right, we're in the home stretch now. I want to thank Jan Hicks, Howie Cohen, Mark Clifton, Don Berwick, Linda Kaufman, Katie Hendricks, Roseanne Haggerty, Mrs. Moncher, and Mr. and Mrs. Damon for being the leaders that I would follow anywhere, and for helping me become the person that I am today. And I hope that something I said here this morning resonates you and inspires you to unleash you and your people. I hope Larry listens to you when you tell him about number 3. Sorry, Larry. May we all be leaders worthy of being followed. May we all be leaders who turn our followers into leaders. And may you thrive in your life-saving and important transformational work that you are doing. Thank you for the huge honor of getting to speak with you this morning, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you. Thank you.